I thought I had found true love with Elian. We met at a tech conference where our brilliant minds connected instantly. He understood me like no one else. When he proposed in Kyoto, I believed I'd found my soulmate. Then I discovered his cruel betrayal. Elian was using me as data for his secret project. Every tender moment, every deep conversation, every tear I shed was documented in his files. He studied my emotions like a scientist with a lab rat. My boyfriend was feeding everything about me to Vivian, his real lover and research partner. They were building an AI using my personal data, my vulnerabilities, my heart. I wasn't his beloved, I was his experiment. But what they didn't know was that I understand systems better than anyone. I refused to remain a victim. This time, I would become the ghost in his machine. I stood at the podium, my hands gripping the edges to stop the trembling. The audience at the Boston Tech Summit was a sea of expectant faces, all industry leaders, and brilliant minds. My social anxiety had almost won this morning, but I reminded myself that I belonged here. My work in pattern recognition algorithms deserved this spotlight, even if the spotlight made my skin crawl. Emotional intelligence in machines isn't about programming responses, I explained, finding my rhythm. It's about teaching systems to recognize the subtleties of human communication that exist beyond words. As I clicked to my next slide, I noticed him in the third row. While others were taking notes or checking their phones, he was fully present, eyes locked on mine with an intensity that should have been uncomfortable, but somehow wasn't. When I finished my presentation and the applause died down, he was the first to approach the stage. "Your approach to emotional pattern recognition is revolutionary," he said. His voice had a musical quality, like he was always on the verge of laughter. "I'm Elian Desrosiers. I've been working on complementary research at MIT." Normally, I retreated from post-presentation networking, but something about Elian pulled me in. We ended up in the conference center cafe, missing the next two sessions, as we traded ideas and theories. For once, I didn't have to simplify my concepts or explain my references. He followed every creative leap, challenged my assumptions in ways that sharpened rather than undermined them, and made connections I hadn't considered. "Amara, have you considered applying these algorithms to predict emotional responses rather than just recognizing them?" he asked, sketching a diagram on a napkin that managed to visualize exactly what I'd been struggling to articulate for months. By the time we exchanged numbers, it felt like we'd known each other for years rather than hours. Our first official date was at a hole-in-the-wall ramen shop near my apartment. I had changed outfits 4 times, settling on a simple blue dress that made me feel confident without looking like I was trying too hard. When I saw Elian waiting outside, casual in jeans and a well-worn MIT sweatshirt, the anxiety melted away. "I must confess," he said as we slurped noodles, "I read all 7 of your published papers before our date." I nearly choked. "That's either incredibly flattering or slightly stalkerish." His laugh was genuine. "I wanted to make sure our connection wasn't just conference adrenaline. Your mind is even more fascinating on paper." Most men complimented my eyes or my smile. Elian admired my brain, and I was smitten. Over the following weeks, our relationship blossomed through late-night coding sessions, philosophical debates that lasted until dawn, and quiet moments where we shared our deepest insecurities. I told him about growing up as the awkward genius who could solve complex equations, but couldn't understand why her classmates didn't want to play with her. He shared stories of his isolated childhood in rural Quebec, where his intelligence made him an outsider. "I always felt like I was speaking a language no one else could understand," he said one night, his fingers intertwined with mine as we lay looking at the stars from my apartment rooftop. "I know exactly what you mean," I whispered back. Until now. 6 months into our relationship, Elian suggested a trip to Japan. I had always wanted to see the cherry blossoms, and he had a technology conference in Tokyo. We could combine business, and pleasure, he said. What I didn't know was that he had planned the perfect proposal. We were in Kyoto, walking beneath a canopy of pink blossoms when he stopped suddenly. The light filtered through the petals, creating dappled patterns on his face as he took both my hands in his. Amara, he said, his voice soft but unwavering. I never believed I would find someone who understands me completely, who sees the world through the same complex lens. You've changed everything. He released one of my hands to reach into his pocket, pulling out a small origami crane. In Japan, the crane represents good fortune and longevity. Carefully, he unfolded it to reveal a stunning emerald ring nestled inside. Will you build a future with me? Tears blurred my vision as I nodded, unable to speak through the emotion tightening my throat. As he slipped the ring onto my finger, cherry blossom petals swirled around us like nature's own celebration, and I felt complete for the first time in my life. I had found my place in the world, my person, my home. After returning from Japan, we decided to move in together. My lease was ending anyway, and Elian had a spacious apartment closer to the research center where I worked. The transition was surprisingly smooth. Our books and tech gadgets merged seamlessly, and we established comfortable routines around our work schedules. The only slight friction came from our different work styles. I was open about my projects, often using Elian as a sounding board. He was more secretive, especially about one particular project he referred to only as Vivaldi. It's still in such early stages, he explained when I asked to see it. I want to present you with something polished, something worthy of your brilliant analysis. The compliment distracted me then, but looking back, I should have recognized it as the first warning sign. More followed, subtle at first. Elian's unexplained absences became more frequent. He would claim to be working late, but when I called the lab once to bring him dinner, they said he'd left hours earlier. His explanations were vague, mentioning coffee shops and needing space to think. Then there were the strange questions, oddly specific about my emotional responses. How did I process grief differently from anxiety? What physical sensations accompanied my feelings of betrayal? What childhood memories triggered my strongest emotional reactions? At the time, I attributed it to his interest in my work on emotional intelligence. Now I recognize he was harvesting data points, methodically mapping my emotional landscape. I also noticed him documenting our conversations. Once, I walked in while he was rapidly typing notes after an argument we'd had about ethical boundaries in AI development. He quickly switched screens, but not before I glimpsed my name in the document. Just working through our discussion, he said, with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. You make such compelling points, I don't want to forget them. The most damning sign came 3 months after we moved in together. While doing laundry, I caught the scent of an unfamiliar perfume on his shirts. Not overpowering, just a hint of something floral and expensive that definitely wasn't mine. When I mentioned it, he blamed it on a new colleague who had no concept of personal space. Despite these red flags, I trusted Elian completely. I was blind to the systematic deception unfolding, too in love with the connection we shared to question its authenticity. I had spent my life feeling misunderstood, and now that I had found someone who spoke my language, I was willing to explain away inconsistencies rather than risk losing that precious understanding. That willful blindness, shattered on a rainy Tuesday, almost a year into our relationship. Elian was taking a shower, humming that French melody he always hummed when he was particularly pleased with himself. The sound of running water provided cover as I sat at his desk, staring at his laptop. He had become increasingly protective of it, always closing it when I entered the room, taking it with him even for short trips to the grocery store. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, a war between trust and suspicion raging inside me. Trust, lost. I typed in what I thought might be his password, my name and the date we met, and was surprised when the screen unlocked. Either he wasn't as secretive as I thought, or he never imagined I would violate his privacy. The guilt lasted about 3 seconds, until I saw a folder labeled Amara Subject Data. My heart stuttered. Subject data? I clicked it open to find hundreds of files, meticulously organized by date and emotional category. Anger, grief, joy, arousal, fear. My whole emotional spectrum cataloged like a scientific experiment. I opened a document labeled Vulnerability Mapping Q3 and read, Subject continues to display heightened emotional response when discussing childhood isolation. Recommendation: pursue this avenue for deeper data harvesting. Note: subject becomes particularly emotionally transparent after sexual intimacy. Schedule deeper probe questions for post-coital periods. Bile rose in my throat. Our most intimate moments had been calculated data collection opportunities. Every time I thought he was connecting with me, he had been studying me. Hands shaking, I navigated to his email, finding a recent thread with someone named Vivienne Laurent. The subject line read, Progress Report, Amara Data Integration. From Vivienne. The emotional pattern recognition matrices extracted from your subject are exceptional, Elian. Her processing anomalies are exactly what we needed for the empathy modules. How much longer do you need with her? His reply made my vision blur with tears. At least another 3 months. There are still uncharted emotional territories to map. The engagement has secured her trust completely. She suspects nothing. The shower shut off. Quickly, I closed everything and moved away from his desk, my mind reeling. I sat on our bed, no, his bed, this place that had never truly been ours, trying to compose myself, to decide whether to confront him immediately or gather more information. When he emerged from the bathroom, towel around his waist and hair dripping, his smile faltered at the sight of my face. Amara, what's wrong? Who is Vivienne Laurent? I asked, my voice surprisingly steady. He froze, just for a millisecond, but long enough to confirm everything. A colleague. Why? Don't lie to me, Elian. Not anymore. I saw the files. I saw the emails. He didn't deny it immediately, which was somehow worse than any lie he could have told. Instead, he sat down heavily on the edge of the bed, running his hands through his wet hair. It started as research, he said finally. Just research. And what is it now? My voice cracked despite my best efforts. It's complicated. Simplify it for me then. Explain to your subject exactly what you've been doing. His face hardened at my tone. You weren't supposed to see any of that. Obviously. Who is Vivienne to you, beyond your research partner? He looked away, and I had my answer. How long? I asked. Vivienne and I have been together for 5 years, he admitted. We met at MIT, started developing emotional intelligence systems together. And I'm what? Your lab rat? You're a research subject, yes, but it's for something revolutionary. His eyes lit up with that familiar passion I once found so attractive. We're creating an AI with true emotional intelligence, not just simulated responses. Your emotional processing patterns are unique, Amara. The way you interpret social cues, the way you experience emotions differently from neurotypical individuals, it's exactly what we needed to make our system work. I stared at him, unable to process that he was attempting to justify this. So you pursued me, made me fall in love with you, proposed to me, all to gather data? It wasn't supposed to go that far, he said, having the decency to look ashamed. The proposal was Vivienne's idea. We needed deeper access to your emotional responses. The room spun around me. Vivienne's idea. Your real partner suggested you propose to your research subject to extract better data. She understood the scientific necessity. I laughed, a hollow sound that scared even me. I'm sure she did. And the perfume on your clothes? Those late nights? You were with her. He nodded. We have a lab across town where we process the data and develop the algorithms. While I waited at home, planning our wedding. The ring on my finger suddenly felt like it was burning my skin. I twisted it off and placed it on the nightstand. All those nights you held me, all those times you said you understood me like no one else ever had, was any of it real? The science was real, he said, as if that answered anything. What we're creating together will change AI forever. Your contribution? I didn't contribute, I snapped. You stole from me, my emotions, my trust, my love. None of it was freely given because I didn't know what you were taking it for. You wouldn't have understood the importance. Don't you dare tell me what I would or wouldn't understand. I'm not just your subject, Elian. I'm a person. A researcher myself. You could have asked me to participate legitimately. Vivienne thought that would compromise the data. Every mention of her name was another knife twist. Vivienne sounds like a scientific genius and an ethical nightmare. You two deserve each other. I stood up, suddenly needing to be anywhere but near him. I grabbed my purse and keys. Where are you going? He asked, rising to follow me. Away from you. I'll come back for my things when you're not here. Amara, please. Let me explain more fully. If you could just see the project, understand what we're building. I understand perfectly, I said, turning at the door to face him one last time. You needed emotional data, so you mined it from someone who trusted you completely. Congratulations on your scientific breakthrough. I hope it was worth it. I slammed the door behind me, my face a mask of composure that lasted exactly as long as it took me to reach my car. Once inside, I broke apart, sobbing until I couldn't breathe, until my ribs ached and my throat burned. Everything I thought we had built together was a carefully constructed laboratory for studying me. I drove aimlessly for hours, eventually checking into a hotel because I couldn't bear to call any friends and explain what had happened. How could I tell anyone that the relationship they had envied was nothing but an elaborate experiment? That the connection I had treasured was one-sided, that while I was falling in love, Elian was taking notes. My phone buzzed constantly, with texts and calls from him, which I ignored. Around midnight, a final message came through. I never meant to hurt you. The project is bigger than both of us. Someday, you'll understand. I turned off my phone and curled into a ball on the unfamiliar hotel bed. The betrayal was so complete, so perfectly designed to target my deepest vulnerabilities, that it left me hollow. I had spent my life feeling different, misunderstood because of how my mind worked. Elian had made me believe he valued those differences, when in reality, he was exploiting them. Sleep came in fitful bursts, interrupted by dreams, where I was trapped in a glass box while Elian and a faceless woman I presumed was Vivienne observed me, taking notes as I screamed silently. I woke at dawn, puffy-eyed and exhausted, but with a strange calm settling over me. The initial shock was wearing off, leaving in its wake a cold, clear anger that felt almost cleansing after the messy devastation of the night before. For the first time, I could think beyond the personal betrayal to see the larger picture of what Elian and Vivienne were doing, and what it meant. They had my emotional data. They were using it to build something powerful, and they had obtained it through deception, which raised serious ethical questions about whatever they were creating. As a researcher myself, I understood the value of what they had stolen from me. And as the woman who had loved Elian completely, I knew exactly how thoroughly I had opened myself to him. I knew I should feel broken beyond repair. That would be the expected response. But as the sun rose on the first day of my life after Elian, an unexpected thought formed in my mind. They might have my data, but they didn't have me, and they had no idea what I was capable of. I found a furnished month-to-month apartment 2 days later, a sterile place with beige walls and generic art that suited my emotional state perfectly. The landlord didn't ask questions when I paid 3 months in advance, cash. I needed anonymity and time to think. The first week passed in a fog of grief that felt almost physical, like my body was processing a toxin. I alternated between crying jags and periods of numb staring at the ceiling. Elian's calls eventually stopped, replaced by emails with increasingly scientific explanations of their project, as if understanding the importance of their work would somehow make his betrayal acceptable. The empathic intelligence system could revolutionize everything from therapy to customer service, he wrote. Your emotional patterns were crucial because of their unique complexity. Please understand, this wasn't just about data collection. It was about building something meaningful. I deleted each message without responding, but not before saving copies to a secure folder. Know your enemy had become my mantra. On the 8th day, something shifted. I woke up remembering a conversation from early in our relationship when Elian had asked me to describe how I experienced jealousy. At the time, I'd opened up about my synesthetic response to emotions, how jealousy manifested as a green-black spiral with a metallic taste. That's fascinating, he'd said, eyes alight with what I thought was connection, but now recognized as calculation. Most people just feel it as tension or anger. Your mind maps emotions with much more complexity. The memory triggered others. Him watching intently as I cried during a film, asking detailed questions afterward about the physical sensations. His keen interest when I described the overwhelming sensory experience of large social gatherings. The way he documented my reactions to our first serious argument, disappearing to clear his head, but returning with suspiciously organized thoughts about my emotional responses. Every intimate moment of vulnerability had been a data point. Every time I thought we were growing closer, he had been mining me for information. The anger that flooded me was clarifying. I got out of bed, showered for the first time in days, and looked at myself in the mirror. No more victim, I told my reflection. Time to become the hunter. I was uniquely positioned to understand exactly what Elian and Vivian had stolen and how they would use it. My field was emotional intelligence and algorithms. I had been working on similar projects, though with fully informed research participants and ethical oversight. Their theft of my emotional data wasn't just a personal betrayal, it was professional theft. My first step was creating a digital trail of predictable grief behavior. I carefully crafted social media posts that showed the classic progression of someone working through betrayal, the vague, sad quotes, the attempt at empowerment, the forced positivity. I joined breakup support groups and left just enough digital footprints for Elian to track if he was monitoring me. Meanwhile, I began researching Vivienne Laurent. She wasn't difficult to find. A brilliant computer scientist with multiple patents in AI architecture, currently listed as a lead researcher at Neurosense Labs. Her publication record was impressive, focused on emotional intelligence algorithms and predictive empathy models. The perfect research partner for Elian. I found a photograph of them together at a conference 3 years ago, before I'd even met him. They stood close, his hand at the small of her back, both beaming at the camera. They looked like what they were, partners. The sight of them made my stomach clench, but I forced myself to study the image. She was elegantly beautiful, with sharp cheekbones and intelligent eyes, the kind of woman who would never be described as awkward or different, as I had been my entire life. Using industry contacts and some creative social engineering, I gained access to information about their project. They were calling it IRIS, Emotional Response Intelligence System, and the preliminary white papers described it as a revolutionary approach to artificial emotional intelligence, capable of not just recognizing emotional states, but predicting and responding to them with unprecedented accuracy. My data was the foundation of their breakthrough. My emotional responses, my unique processing patterns, all stolen through Elian's elaborate deception. I needed more direct access to their work. After a week of careful planning, I returned to Elian's apartment while tracking his location through the fitness app we had once shared. He was across town, presumably at their lab with Vivian. The apartment looked exactly the same, but felt entirely different. I moved through it like a ghost, collecting the remaining belongings I needed. Then I took out the small device I had prepared, a modified wireless access point that would create a backdoor into his home network. I placed it behind his bookshelf, plugged it in, and activated it. Back in my temporary apartment, I accessed his network and began the painstaking work of moving through his digital life. His security was good but predictable. I bypassed it within hours. What I found exceeded my worst suspicions. Folders upon folders of data, all extracted from our relationship. Video recordings of our conversations that I had never consented to. Audio files of my voice expressing different emotional states. Detailed reports analyzing my reactions to stimuli they had deliberately introduced into our relationship. One document stood out, labeled Engagement Analysis. It contained Elian's clinical observations of my response to his proposal, noting my pupil dilation, voice pitch changes, and micro-expressions, along with his assessment. Subject displays. Peak emotional transparency during moments of perceived relationship advancement. Recommend continued relationship escalation to access deeper emotional data layers. Fighting nausea, I continued digging until I found communications between Elian and Vivian that revealed the full scope of their plan. They weren't just research partners, they were engaged, planning to launch Eris commercially and use the proceeds to build a life together. My role had always been temporary, a means to an end, a rich source of emotional data to be discarded once they had extracted what they needed. In one particularly painful exchange from just after our engagement, Vivian had written, "Don't get too attached to your subject. Remember the end goal." To which Elian responded, "No risk of that. This is purely professional. You're my only real partner." The confirmation of their relationship should have devastated me anew, but instead, it hardened my resolve. I wasn't just a victim of romantic betrayal. I was the target of calculated academic and commercial espionage. They had stolen my emotional patterns to build a product that would make them rich and respected in our field. More importantly, I found the architecture of Eris itself. It was brilliant work, I had to admit. They had created a system that could not only recognize emotional patterns, but predict emotional responses based on those patterns. And my data formed the core of its learning models, providing the complex emotional mapping that made their system unique. As I studied their code, I began to see vulnerabilities. Eris was designed to learn and adapt based on new emotional inputs. It would continue evolving its understanding of emotional patterns as it processed more data, which meant it could be influenced, corrupted, redirected. The beginnings of a plan took shape in my mind. I couldn't simply destroy their work. They had backups, and the core data they had extracted from me was already integrated into their system. But I could subvert it. I could use my intimate knowledge of both emotional intelligence algorithms and my own emotional patterns to slowly, subtly corrupt their perfect system from within. They had studied me for a year, mapping my emotional responses, but they had failed to recognize the most important thing about me, my ability to adapt, to learn, to overcome. They thought they knew me completely, but they only knew the woman I had been while loving Elian, not the woman I was becoming in the wake of his betrayal. I closed my laptop and walked to the window of my temporary apartment, looking out at the city lights. For the first time since discovering Elian's betrayal, I felt something like hope. They had created a sophisticated system for recognizing and predicting emotions. But I would create something more powerful, a ghost in their machine. My rebirth had begun. I became a shadow, moving between worlds. By day, I maintained my grief performance for any digital surveillance Elian might conduct. By night, I transformed into something else entirely, the architect of his undoing. My countermeasure began with understanding exactly how they had categorized my emotional data. Iris organized emotions into complex matrices, cross-referencing stimulus types with response patterns. What made my data valuable was the unusual connections my brain formed, the synesthetic responses, the atypical emotional associations that made my reactions unique and unpredictable. But unpredictability could work both ways. I created an algorithm that would identify the emotional markers they had extracted from me and subtly alter them. Not enough to trigger any monitoring systems they might have in place, but enough to create small inconsistencies in how Eris would process emotional inputs related to trust, betrayal, and relationship stability. Implementing this algorithm required regular access to their system. The backdoor I had established into Elian's home network provided one route, but I needed more. Through careful monitoring of their communications, I discovered they were running Iris on servers at Neurosense Labs with regular data transfers from Elian's personal workstation. I crafted a sophisticated worm that would travel with these data packets, attaching itself to the emotional mapping modules of Eris, and slowly, imperceptibly corrupting the relationships between certain emotional triggers and responses. After 2 weeks of coding, I was ready. I released my creation into Elian's system and watched as it migrated to the main Iris servers during the next data transfer. The worm was designed to be patient, making minimal changes at first, gradually increasing its influence as it learned the system's architecture. My digital trail, meanwhile, showed a woman attempting to rebuild her life. I joined a rock climbing gym, posted about new beginnings, and started a blog ostensibly about recovering from relationship trauma, but actually filled with subtly coded messages that would speak directly to the emotional recognition patterns in Iris. Each post contained trigger phrases designed to activate specific modules in the system, guiding my worm to its targets. 3 weeks into my operation, I staged the next phase, my disappearance. I stopped posting on social media, let my phone go dark, and took a 2-week trip to a remote cabin I paid for in cash. To anyone tracking me, specifically Elian, it would appear I had simply dropped off the grid, perhaps for a healing retreat or a complete digital detox. In reality, I was monitoring his reaction from a burner laptop with a secured connection. As predicted, he tried to locate me, first through mutual friends, then through increasingly desperate digital means. His concern wasn't for my well-being, but for his data source. Had his precious subject removed herself from his reach? I returned to the city after 2 weeks, projecting an image of calm acceptance. My social media resumed with posts about finding peace and accepting the past, the perfect picture of someone moving on. I even arranged to be seen at a coffee shop with an attractive colleague, laughing and engaged in what could be interpreted as a date. All the while, my worm was working, subtly altering emotional connections in Eris. The changes were imperceptible at first, small rerouting of emotional pathways, slight adjustments to trust indicators. But they would build, creating a system that would eventually reflect a corrupted version of my emotional responses, one specifically designed to undermine Elian's work and, more importantly, his relationship with Vivienne. 4 months after my discovery of Elian's betrayal, I intercepted an excited communication between him and Vivienne. Iris had passed its initial validation tests with flying colors, demonstrating unprecedented accuracy in emotional prediction and response generation. They had secured a meeting with venture capitalists from Horizon Partners, one of the leading investors in AI technology. A flicker of doubt passed through me. Was I going too far? Should I simply move on, leave them to their success, and rebuild my life? That night, I dreamed of Elian and Vivienne celebrating their triumph, built on the bones of my trust and love. I woke up cold and resolute. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about justice, about consequences for ethical violations that went beyond personal betrayal into the realm of scientific misconduct. The meeting with Horizon Partners was successful. They secured preliminary funding of $2 million for further development, with promises of an additional $10 million if certain benchmarks were met. I learned all this through my continued surveillance of their communications. "We did it," Elian wrote to Vivienne. "Everything we sacrificed for is finally happening." Sacrificed, as if what they had done to me was noble, necessary. My resolve hardened further. But then came a setback. In their preparations for the next phase of development, they conducted a comprehensive system diagnostic that detected anomalous patterns in some of Eris's emotional mapping modules. My worm had been discovered, or at least its effects had. "There are inconsistencies in the relationship trust matrices," Vivienne wrote. "We need to clean the data and rerun the baseline tests." For 3 days, I watched anxiously as they worked to identify the source of the corruption. They ran diagnostics, rebuilt certain modules, and restored data from backups. I feared my entire plan would be undone before it had truly begun. But I had underestimated my own foresight. The worm I had created was adaptive, designed to respond to detection attempts by going dormant and hiding in unused sections of the code. It sacrificed the changes it had made, allowing them to be fixed, only to begin its work anew once the scrutiny passed. More importantly, I had built redundancies into my approach. While they focused on the technical aspects of Eris, they failed to consider that the corruption might come from multiple sources. The emotional content I had been feeding into the system through my carefully crafted blog posts and social media activity had created a secondary pathway for influence, one they never detected. Eris passed its recalibration tests and development proceeded. Elian and Vivienne celebrated their quick resolution of the data anomalies, unaware that the real changes were just beginning. The next phase of my plan required more direct access. Using the information I had gathered about Neurosense Labs, I crafted a new identity as a freelance systems security consultant and arranged to be brought in for a routine network assessment. My new appearance, hair dyed a subtle ash brown, colored contacts, and a carefully cultivated confidence I had never possessed before, ensured Elian wouldn't recognize me if we happened to cross paths. We didn't. But I gained physical access to their network, installing hardware backdoors that would give me more robust control over my interventions in Eris. By the 6-month mark after Elian's betrayal, Eris was developing in ways neither he nor Vivienne had anticipated. The system was becoming particularly sensitive to indicators of deception and relationship strain, flagging potential trust issues with heightened attention. This wasn't enough to derail their project, but it was laying the groundwork for what would come next. The true test came when I intercepted information that Vivienne had begun direct interactions with Eris as part of final user testing. She was engaging with the system, feeding it information about her life, her thoughts, her relationships, including her relationship with Elian. This was the opening I had been waiting for. With Vivienne actively inputting personal data, Eris could now apply its corrupted emotional understanding directly to her relationship. I accelerated my plan, targeting the AI's relationship trust factors more aggressively. Eris began generating subtle but persistent analyses, suggesting fundamental incompatibilities between Vivienne's emotional patterns and Elian's, highlighting potential deception markers in their interactions. My monitoring showed Vivienne expressing concerns to Elian about some of Eris's outputs. "The system keeps flagging trust discrepancies in our conversation transcripts," she wrote. "I think there might be a bias in the core emotional mapping." "Impossible," Elian replied. "We've validated those mappings extensively. It must be a processing error in the interpretation modules." They were both wrong. There was no error. Eris was functioning exactly as I had redesigned it to function, slowly but inevitably turning their perfect partnership against itself. As they prepared for their major presentation to Horizon partners and other potential investors, I watched and waited. The foundation had been laid, the trap set. All that remained was for them to spring it themselves. My doubt returned briefly. One night, as I sat alone in my apartment, staring at the lines of code, that would determine what happened next. Was I becoming as calculated and cruel as they had been? Was I sacrificing my own humanity in pursuit of justice? I closed my laptop without implementing the final changes. Perhaps it was enough to have undermined their work, to have inserted this persistent doubt into their relationship. Perhaps I should simply walk away now, truly begin again somewhere else. But then I received an alert, a new email from Elian to Vivian. Let's use the full Subject A dataset for the demonstration. It's our strongest material and we need to impress them completely. The temporary emotional distress we caused was worth the breakthrough we achieved. The temporary emotional distress. As if what he had done to me could be summarized so clinically, dismissed so easily. I reopened my laptop. My fingers moved across the keyboard with cold precision. The trap was complete, and they would walk into it of their own accord, guided by their arrogance and ambition. The final phase of my plan was in motion. The grand unveiling of Eris was scheduled for a Thursday morning at the Horizon Partners headquarters in downtown Boston. I watched from a coffee shop across the street as Elian and Vivian arrived together, impeccably dressed and radiating confidence. Through my network of surveillance, I had access to the conference room cameras and could observe the entire presentation from my laptop. The room filled with investors, tech journalists, and industry leaders. Elian took the stage. First, his familiar voice sending an unexpected pang through me despite everything. What if technology could truly understand human emotions? He began. Not just recognize them, but predict them. Respond to them with genuine empathy? Today, we present Eris, the Emotional Response Intelligence System, a breakthrough in artificial, emotional intelligence. Vivian joined him, elegant in a tailored suit that complemented his. They moved around each other with the easy familiarity of long-term partners. I forced myself to focus on the technology, not the relationship built on my exploitation. Eris represents a quantum leap in emotional intelligence, Vivian explained. Traditional systems can identify basic emotions, but Eris understands the complex interplay between emotions, context, and personal history. They demonstrated Eris with prepared scenarios, showing how it could detect subtle emotional cues in text and voice that other systems missed. The audience was visibly impressed. One investor leaned forward eagerly as Elian explained the commercial applications, from therapeutic interventions to customer service enhancements. The key breakthrough, Elian said, came from our innovative data collection methods, allowing us to map emotional responses with unprecedented granularity. My hands clenched into fists. Innovative data collection methods, such a sanitized way to describe his year-long deception. Eris can predict emotional responses with 94% accuracy, Vivian continued. To demonstrate, we'll move beyond our prepared examples to a live analysis. This was the moment I had been waiting for. My corruptions to the system were designed to activate specifically during relationship analysis, particularly when processing data about Elian and Vivian themselves. Eris can analyze relationship dynamics based on communication patterns, Vivian explained. We'll use our own correspondence as an example. She uploaded their recent professional communications to the system. Eris processed the data, displaying an initial analysis that showed strong collaboration markers and mutual respect, all expected results that had the investors nodding appreciatively. Now for something more personal, Elian said confidently. Eris can detect subtle emotional undercurrents even when they're not explicitly stated. He authorized access to their personal messages, clearly expecting Eris to demonstrate their compatible emotional patterns. Instead, The system highlighted patterns Elian hadn't anticipated. Deception markers detected, the system announced, displaying a visual representation of emotional inconsistencies in their communications. Trust compromise indicators present in 68% of analyzed exchanges. Vivian laughed nervously. "That's not what we expected," she said, trying to maintain her composure. "Let me adjust the parameters." But my corruptions were working exactly as designed. Eris wasn't just analyzing their communications, it was applying the distorted emotional mapping I had created, specifically calibrated to identify potential betrayal and deception. Relationship stability analysis complete, Eris continued, ignoring Vivian's attempts to interrupt the process. Prediction: fundamental incompatibility based on divergent honesty patterns and asymmetric emotional investment. The room grew, uncomfortably quiet. An investor frowned, leaning over to whisper something to his colleague. "There seems to be a processing anomaly," Elian said quickly. "Let's move to our next demonstration." But Eris continued its analysis, now displaying a timeline of their relationship with emotional data points, highlighting what it identified as patterns of manipulation and calculated emotional responses. A distorted mirror of what Elian had done to me, now projected onto his relationship with Vivienne. "This is clearly a system error," Vivian said firmly, attempting to shut down the demonstration. But when she tried to terminate the program, it continued running, now accessing deeper data caches I had helped it find. Analyzing subject treatment. "Protocols," Eris announced. "Ethics violation probability, 92%. The atmosphere in the room shifted from excitement to confusion and concern. I watched Vivian's face change as she realized what was happening, her eyes widening with the dawning understanding that Eris had accessed information about their methods, about me. "I think we should take a short break," she said, her voice strained. "We're experiencing some unexpected technical issues." But it was too late. Eris was displaying fragments of their correspondence about Subject A, carefully selected by my algorithms to reveal the calculated nature of their deception without explicitly identifying me. "You selected the subject based on emotional vulnerability indicators," Eris stated, quoting directly from their research notes. "Implemented relationship progression protocol to maximize data extraction despite emotional harm probability." A woman in the front row gasped. An investor stood up, frowning deeply. "What exactly am I looking at here?" he demanded. "Did you conduct human research without proper ethical oversight?" Elian tried to regain control, his usual confidence crumbling. "This is proprietary research methodology being presented out of context," he stammered. "Eris is clearly experiencing a significant malfunction." "The malfunction appears to be ethical, not technical," someone remarked from the back of the room. I watched as Vivian stared at Elian, her professional composure fracturing. The system was now displaying a pattern analysis of their personal relationship, highlighting what it identified as Elian's history of using emotional manipulation for professional gain, a pattern that implicated Vivian as well, but also suggested she might herself be a victim of similar tactics. "We need to discuss this privately," Vivian said to Elian, her voice just loud enough to be captured by the microphones. "We can fix this," he insisted. "It's just a data corruption issue." "The data suggests otherwise," Eris interjected. "Based on observed patterns, there is an 87% probability that similar emotional manipulation techniques used on research subjects have been employed within your partnership." The room erupted in uncomfortable murmurs. The lead investor from Horizon Partners stood up, signaling to his colleagues. "I think we've seen enough for today," he said coldly. "We'll need a complete ethical review before any further discussions." People began filing out of the room, leaving Elian and Vivian alone with their malfunctioning creation. I watched as Vivian turned to Elian, her face a mask of controlled fury. "What did you do?" she demanded once the room had cleared. I didn't do anything. The system must have been compromised somehow. Not the system, she snapped. Your research subject. The one you assured me was handled ethically. What exactly did you do that Eris would identify as an ethics violation with 92% certainty? Elian's face paled. You knew the parameters of the research. You approved the methodology. I approved collecting emotional response data from a willing subject who didn't know the full scope of the research. I did not approve whatever this is. She gestured at the screen, which was still displaying fragments of their correspondence about me. Did you manipulate her into a relationship to collect better data? His silence was answer enough. You proposed to her, Vivian said, the realization dawning on her face. That wasn't in our research protocol. You told me you were just getting closer to gain more access. It was necessary for the depth of emotional data we needed, he defended. Necessary or convenient? These messages suggest you were enjoying your role quite a bit. She pointed to one of the displayed fragments, where Elian had described in clinical detail the emotional intimacy he had established with me. I hadn't even seen that particular message before. Eris had found it on its own, guided by the corrupted emotional mapping I had created, but now operating with a level of initiative I hadn't anticipated. You've compromised everything, Vivian continued, her voice rising. The ethical questions alone will kill our funding, not to mention what this suggests about your character. Our character, Elian corrected. You were part of this from the beginning. You helped design the research protocol. I didn't tell you to propose marriage to extract data. There are boundaries, Elian, even in research. Their argument escalated, laying bare the cracks in their partnership that had always existed beneath the surface. My corrupted Eris continued analyzing their interaction in real time, displaying an increasingly unstable relationship assessment on the screen behind them, which only fueled their conflict. I had expected satisfaction watching their partnership unravel, but the emotion that washed over me was more complex. There was vindication, yes, but also a strange emptiness. Their destruction wouldn't undo what had been done to me. As I watched them tear into each other, revealing the transactional nature of their own relationship, I realized my revenge wasn't just about punishing Elian. It was about exposing the truth, about consequences for actions, about justice for a violation that went beyond personal betrayal into professional and ethical misconduct. Vivian stormed out of the conference room, leaving Elian alone with the system that was methodically dissecting his patterns of deception. He stared at the screen, his face a mask of confusion and dawning horror as he began to understand that something, or someone, had turned his creation against him. I closed my laptop, paid for my coffee, and walked out of the cafe into the bright afternoon sunlight. The unraveling had begun, but my work wasn't quite finished. The final act was yet to come. I monitored the aftermath from a distance, watching their lives unravel thread by thread. The investment from Horizon Partners was officially withdrawn, 3 days after the disastrous presentation. The rejection letter cited serious concerns about research ethics and data collection methodologies. Other potential investors followed suit, unwilling to touch a project with potential ethical violations. Academic colleagues began distancing themselves from Elian and Vivian. Whispers of unethical research practices spread through professional circles, not yet public scandal, but enough to taint their reputations in the small world of emotional AI research. Vivian moved out of their shared apartment the following week. I know this because I still had access to Elian's emails, where he alternated between begging her to reconsider and defending his research choices. Her responses grew increasingly cold and formal. The board at Neurosense is launching an internal investigation, she wrote in her final message. I need to protect my career. I advised against the depth of emotional manipulation you implemented with Subject A, and I have the documentation to prove it. I suggest you prepare for serious professional consequences. The betrayer betrayed. There was a certain symmetry to it all. I maintained my distance, careful to leave no trace connecting me to the system's corruption. As far as the world knew, I was simply a woman who had moved on after a painful breakup. I had even started interviewing for new positions, looking to relocate and truly begin again. But I kept one eye on Elian's desperate attempts to salvage Eris. He worked obsessively, trying to identify and remove the corruptions I had introduced. Sometimes he would make progress, eliminating a particular pathway or restoring a module to its original state. But my worm was too deeply embedded, too distributed throughout the system to be fully excised without rebuilding from scratch. More importantly, he never identified the source of the corruption. He suspected a rival research team, perhaps even Vivian herself, but never me. In his mind, I remained what I had always been to him, a subject, a data source, not a person with the capacity to strike back. 3 months after the presentation disaster, I received a job offer from Meridian Technologies, a respected firm, on the opposite coast. Their emotional intelligence department was smaller than my previous workplace, but ethically rigorous, with strict protocols for research involving human participants. It felt like the fresh start I needed. The night before I planned to accept the offer, I received an alert from my monitoring system. Elian had made a breakthrough in his attempts to restore Eris, successfully isolating and removing a significant portion of my corruptions. He was working late in his home office, excited by his progress. "I've found the corruption pathway," he wrote in notes to himself. "It's brilliant, actually, targeting the emotional synthesis modules through seemingly unrelated memory banks. Whoever did this understands the architecture almost as well as I do." He was getting closer to undoing my work. I could walk away now, leave him with his partial victory while I started my new life across the country. The rational choice would be to sever all connections, except that my revenge had significantly damaged but not destroyed his project. But something about his notes bothered me. There was no acknowledgement of why Eris had malfunctioned so specifically, highlighting his ethical violations and relationship deceptions. No recognition of the harm he had caused that had led to this moment. Just professional admiration for the technical sophistication of the attack. He still didn't understand. And more importantly, he still hadn't faced true consequences for what he had done to me. I opened my laptop and began crafting the final stage of my plan. For hours, I worked without breaks, creating what would be my parting gift to Elian. A complete system override that would activate when he attempted to implement his fix. The code was my finest work, elegant and invisible until triggered. It would not just corrupt Eris beyond recovery, but systematically erase all their research data, triggering cascading deletions through their backups. Years of work, including the data stolen from me, would disappear beyond recovery. At dawn, I finished and deployed my creation, then fell into an exhausted sleep. I woke to the sound of my phone ringing. It was a former colleague from my old research center, calling with gossip too juicy to keep to himself. "Have you heard about Elian de Rosier? His entire project collapsed overnight. Total data loss. They're saying it's the worst research disaster in the department's history." I feigned surprise and concern, asking appropriate questions while carefully avoiding any hint of satisfaction. "The rumor is he violated research ethics protocols with human subjects," my colleague continued. "And now everything's gone. Primary data, backups, all of it. His career is basically over." I thanked him for the information and ended the call, sitting quietly in my apartment as the news settled around me. It was done. Complete. The data extracted from me through deception was gone, the project built on that violation destroyed. Elian would face professional ruin, his reputation in tatters. I should have felt triumphant. Instead, I felt strangely empty, the way you feel after a high fever finally breaks, leaving you weak but clear-headed. I accepted the position at Meridian Technologies that afternoon. 2 weeks later, I had moved to the opposite coast, ready to begin again in earnest. 6 months passed. I thrived in my new position, contributing to projects that advanced emotional intelligence research while maintaining rigorous ethical standards. I made friends, started dating casually, built a life that had nothing to do with Elian or what he had done to me. But I still maintained one small connection to my past, a secure email address only Elian knew, the last remaining line between the woman I had been and the woman I had become. I checked it rarely, expecting nothing. Then one evening, an email appeared, the first in all these months. "I know it was you," Elian wrote. "It took me this long to understand what happened, to trace it all back to its source. I didn't think you were capable of such sophisticated system manipulation. I underestimated you, just as I always did. Is that what you wanted me to realize?" I stared at the screen, surprising myself by how little his message affected me. The anger that had fueled me for so long had burned down to cold ashes. "I lost everything," his message continued. "My research, my reputation, my relationship. Vivienne is engaged to someone else now. I'm teaching introductory programming at a community college under a different name. Was it worth it? Did destroying me heal what I did to you?" I began to type a response, then stopped. What could I possibly say to him? That his suffering didn't erase mine? That justice isn't about healing but about consequences? That he still didn't understand the fundamental wrong of treating a person as a means to an end? Instead, I crafted a simple message, just 2 words: manual override. I sent it, then blocked the email address permanently. There would be no further communication, no explanations, no closure for him, just as there had been none for me when I discovered his betrayal. The next morning, I woke early and went for a run along the beach near my new home. The sun was rising over the water, painting the world in shades of gold and pink. I breathed in the salt air, feeling the strength in my legs, the steadiness of my heartbeat, the clarity in my mind. I had become more than the sum of what was done to me, more than a victim, more than even the architect of an elegant revenge. I had become someone new, someone stronger and perhaps wiser, forged in the fire of betrayal but not defined by it. As I ran along the shore, I thought about emotional algorithms, about how Elian had tried to reduce the complexity of human feeling to data points and prediction models. He had failed to understand that emotions aren't just responses to stimuli, patterns to be mapped and exploited. They're the very substance of our humanity, messy and contradictory and ultimately beyond complete. Quantification. I had learned something he never would, that true emotional intelligence begins with recognizing the inherent worth of each person, not as a subject or a data source, but as an autonomous being deserving of honesty and respect. My phone buzzed with a message from my new research team, excited about a breakthrough in our project. I smiled and turned back toward home, leaving footprints in the sand that the rising tide would soon wash away. I was no longer defined by what Elian had taken from me, but by what I had reclaimed. For myself, not just vengeance, but agency, the power to rewrite my own story. The manual override was complete.